Muted.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the Friday Sugar Support Call. I know we've been on hiatus for quite some time, so we're excited to get back together. We do have some really great updates for you. So we're going to start with Sarah, who's the Colorado Shine Support Specialist with ECLA, who's really been spearheading a lot of work with our vendors and has updated a preferred vendors contact list.
Hi, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well this Friday afternoon. So what you see before you is the now up-to-date preferred vendor contact list. And this, let me just say, is for internal use only. As you see, it has all our sales rep names and emails and the discounts. And I just sent over to Joni to upload to the ECLA support site a public-facing vendor list that you can share with your providers. And it's a more simplified version of this. And all the contacts have been updated in Sugar. And the vendors are ready for you guys to spend, for your providers to spend. So get on it. And does anyone have any questions as far as vendors and vendor relationships goes, and any issues you might be having that you know, are kind of major that we should address?
Well, and I think also to provide a little bit of context, I know we have been handling quite a bit of questions related to vendors through the support desk, and this effort was really in response to all of those questions, and really making sure that if ECLA has a written agreement in place with a vendor, which means they're on this list, that we have certain expectations of the way they handle our orders as councils. And so we know that there have been some complaints about vendors not recognizing that they received a purchase order request, or having email trouble, or, you know, all things that run the gamut, you know, not applying the right discount code. And so we wanted to be sure that there was sort of a comprehensive review with each of these vendors that Sarah was graciously able to take the lead on. So that's what the context is for this. So if you still have some outstanding concerns, you're not seeing improvement in the way that orders are being handled, please let us know, and you're welcome to chat that in right now, or unmute yourself and we can just have a conversation about it.
All right.
This is Kathy Moyer, and I did have a question.
Okay.
We have a site in particular that purchased some items through Lakeshore. And when they arrived, they were the wrong size, and Lakeshore doesn't offer anything smaller. So they would like to return them and then purchase through a different vendor. And they weren't really sure what that process looks like to then reimburse the money back to the requisition.
Oh, okay. And have they contacted Lakeshore directly?
They did, yes. And Lakeshore said that they would take the item back, but they would, because they didn't have the box, that they would have to only reimburse them a portion of the purchase.
Was Lakeshore willing to let them just exchange using the same value, but that would require them to purchase through Lakeshore?
I'm not sure. They didn't offer that, but the problem is that it was a set of high chairs that were not small enough, and so they needed to purchase them from a different vendor only because Lakeshore doesn't have something small enough. And their answer, we were talking with I think her name was Beverly at Lakeshore, and she just stated that they couldn't reimburse the full price if it didn't have a box, and that they weren't sure what that process was like. And that the program would need the money to go back into their requisition so that they can then have the money to purchase from somewhere else.
Yeah, so it sounds like there are kind of two different issues going on. One is, how do I reflect the return in sugar? And then the other is, how do I understand what the vendor's refund policy is? So I think that you did the right thing by contacting the vendor directly to figure out if an item is returnable. And if it is, there may be a penalty for open materials. And that might be something we can talk with them about, but honestly, I don't know that we'll get much traction on that. You know, in that case, then you're not returning the full amount in sugar, you're only returning a partial amount. And there is a process to return or sort of apply a credit in sugar, and so we can walk through that a little bit later in the call. And there's also an article on the support site that I can send over to you. Have you already submitted a support ticket for this?
No, we have not.
Okay, someone had a very similar issue, and I thought it was that one. So yeah, if you want to submit a support ticket, I'll be sure to send, or you know what, actually what I'll do is I'll send that link to the whole sugar.users list, because it's you know, relatively new resource. And so, you know, we can kind of get that out to everyone so it's very clear. I'll also send out the link to the process for back ordering items, which is a sort of a different process as well, and is a little bit, it's particular in kind of the order of steps to make sure that things are applied correctly. So we can kind of send out both of those resources.
And unfortunately, we don't get into the nitty-gritty of return policies with vendors because they are all so different, but we do have that. And, you know, I'm sorry that the provider is taking, you know, a bit of a loss because of Lakeshore's return policy. And I don't know how willing they would be to make, you know, exceptions, because if they make exceptions for, you know, one provider, they might have to make exceptions for everyone. So we just have to be cognizant of that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much for asking the question. We also have a question from Karina saying, we have had an issue with Kaplan delivering items to the wrong address. Karina, to follow up on that, is that because the address in Sugar, the mailing address in Sugar, which is the licensing QRES address, is wrong, or are they sending it to like a totally different address? Just want to clarify that question.
Okay, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is Karina. The address in Sugar is correct. The invoicing address is all correct, but for some reason there's a transverse in numbers between Kaplan and whoever they hire to deliver the items, especially if it's a bigger bulk items. For example, I have a child care site that it's on 28.5 road. They keep wanting to deliver it to 28 road. It's like the system doesn't recognize the half.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And so luckily, the mailman recognizes the name of the business. So he's like, oh, that's not even on your route. That's on my route.
Oh, my goodness.
So it was a significant order. It was a CCAP order. So obviously, you know, they had more funding. It was a large center with 7 classrooms. And I want to say the order totaled a little bit over 4,000. And it was all at one time. And so they were trying to deliver it to some home. And there was a home at that same address on 28 Road versus a child care center.
Yeah.
So,
And did you talk to Kaplan? Did you reach out to Kaplan directly to discuss that issue?
I did. I talked to Mills about that, and he wasn't quite sure what was going on. But then also there was another time that one provider received a bunch of boxes, and then inside one of her boxes was a box labeled for a whole nother provider.
Ooh.
And they were both family child care homes, and they know each other, so she just called her and said, I think I have one of your boxes over here. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. So I also emailed him about those. And just, I mean, they've been great to work with. All of them have been great to work with and are usually pretty willing to work with us in any issues that we've had. But that has been something that's happened here. I'm not sure if it's happened anywhere else.
Yeah, if people could chat in if that's happened to them too. I think that is important information for ECLA to talk with Kaplan about. because, you know, we need reliable delivery.
Service, yeah.
And if there's not reliable delivery, then that needs to be addressed kind of as quickly as possible. So,
yeah, and I'll contact Mills directly, just so he knows that, you know, ECHLA's also aware of this issue and what we can do in the future.
yeah. It looks like we have another question. We had an issue with where wrong items were shipped from Lakeshore, so look forward to the email. Okay, and was that because they were ordered incorrectly, or it was because Lakeshore sort of mispackaged the order? Do you have some information on that?
Is that from Jessica?
Yes. Lakeshore just shipped the wrong products, not ordered. Okay, so that's another thing we should reach out to Lakeshore about. Or they never received items ordered. Ooh. So Kathy, you just they received items they never ordered. Was that order intended for a different childcare site that you're aware of?
So they received their order from Lakeshore, and it had everything they did order, plus a couple of extra items that were never on their order.
Oh, well, did you pay for them?
Are they freebies?
Apparently. So she contacted Lakeshore directly, and she sent them back.
Oh, that's so good of her. Yeah, I mean, you know, I think these vendors are really, you know, big vendors, and they've got a lot of business, and they've got a lot of business they're doing for us, and so there are going to be occasions where mistakes happen. So I think your instinct to just reach out directly to the vendor is the best, and just let us know. Please feel free to escalate to ECHLA if there's something where reaching out to them did not resolve the issue, or it's kind of a recurring issue and keeps happening. Those are the kinds of things that we want ECHLA to take a look at. I think we had one other.
From Nicole. We were wondering if we should be requesting shipping slips from our providers to make sure they are getting their items. So
that is a great question, and I think it might have been your question. I think I just responded to that question on the support desk. So there is no requirement to upload that into Sugar unless the child care site is requesting reimbursement. If they're requesting reimbursement, they have to upload a whole bunch of different documentation. If they requested the council to direct pay the provider or the vendor, then that shipping slip is not required in Sugar. However, it may be required from your own internal control procedures. So your financial policies rule if they are stricter than what's in Sugar. So just keep that in mind, especially if you have a fiscal sponsor. Sometimes they have more strict internal control procedures. I think that there is another question. Do make sure the shipping address in Sugar is the address you want it to ship to as well. That has been our issue. So we will be talking about shipping addresses actually right after this little section on vendors. Right now, if you have a provider who has a shipping address that is different than what is in QRAS for the mailing address, then you can note that in the special instructions on the EC Connect form, and that does go to the vendor. However, we have gotten reports that vendors sometimes don't notice those special instructions, so that's one thing that we are communicating with our preferred vendors, that they really need to pay attention to that special instructions box. But we will be giving an update on an enhancement that we are doing to allow the provider to confirm their shipping address at the time they submit their EC Connect form. And at that point, if they want to change the shipping address, then they can do that. And that is actually, that will be stored in a separate shipping field in Sugar. So because QRAS does override every night the shipping address, because that's the official licensing shipping address. So there might be some cases where you really need that provider to go update with licensing their shipping address. However, if that's not really practical for whatever reason or doesn't make sense, then you can just update in this new field. Now, this has not been implemented yet. We do have some updates from our Sugar Advisory Group, which today was our very first meeting, and this is one of the topics we covered. So we will go over that in just a minute. So I think we might have a couple of other questions.
Yeah.
Looks like Lilith is having an issue with that as well. So because the address is embedded in their licensing, and even in the special instructions, they do not catch it. And we've got another person, the shipping address issue is something that is an issue for almost all of our programs. Generally, we all have to have P.O. boxes because there isn't delivery to the sites. Yeah, and we heard from several councils that sometimes they do like a combination of a P.O. box and a physical mailing address. And so everybody seems to have a slightly different way of needing their shipping addresses to be completed. So that's why we've kind of come up with this new solution that will allow for that process to happen. So we'll go over that in just a minute. Are there any other questions around the approved vendors or vendors in general while we have Sarah here? Okay. Well, again, you are always welcome to escalate to the support desk if you are having trouble with a vendor or you're having like recurring trouble with a vendor. But again, the fastest, best practice is to just reach out directly to your vendor. Most of you have separate accounts with each of these vendors on your own. And so, you know, they really are your vendor. They're working for you, and they want to make you happy. So
yes, they do. Make sure. All right, everyone. Well, thank you, and have a good weekend. I have to take off, but always feel free to reach out to me as well with any questions you may have.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too. All right. So I put together a quick little agenda for today. So the next update is some updates from our very first Sugar Advisory Group, which occurred this morning. And quite a few of you that are on the call, I think, were actually at our meeting this morning as well. So if you are more than welcome to chime in on any updates you want to give about the advisory group. But today's meeting was really all about kind of establishing the purpose of the group. We will be drafting a charter and determining what the protocols are for when new development or enhancements need to be approved by the Sugar Advisory Group, kind of run through the Sugar Advisory Group, versus when they can be handled by the ECLA staff, or when they really are significant enough that they should go to the ECLA board for approval. So that was one of the major topics we talked about. But we also talked about, and this will be more relevant to most of our Sugar Advisory Groups, are really going to be around development content and really approving and giving feedback on new developments. So as you can see from this agenda, we are planning on making the enhancements for the shipping address management via EC Connect. And the way that we will be doing that is at the time that a provider submits an EC Connect request form, then a little pop-up will come up that kind of gives them a confirmation of the current shipping address we have on file, which will default, of course, to the QRAS official licensed mailing address. And then it will give them a little option that says something like, you know, if please confirm that this is the correct shipping address. If not, you know, please enter your shipping address below. And then that will actually set on the account record a little flag that indicates that all future orders can go to that new shipping address, so that we know that, you know, they're not having to do that every time they submit a QI request form. So now that we kind of had the opportunity to run that by the advisory group, they were very much in favor of moving forward with that development. So we will be moving forward with that, and we'll likely be able to get that out in the next week or so, so that we can, start having those shipping issues addressed. So if anybody's interested in helping to test that functionality, please let me know. You can email support@eclacolorado.org, because we'd be happy to include you in the testing process. Part of the role of the Sugar Advisory Group will really be around testing before we release a major change. And that way we can hopefully avoid some of the road bumps we've hit. As in the last 18 months, we've had to roll things out very quickly, and sometimes we weren't able to test every possible scenario, particularly as it relates to spending actions. So we're really trying to get more people involved in the testing phase so that we can avoid any pain points in the future. Are there any questions about the address management or kind of the Sugar Advisory Group more generally speaking? Would anyone from the advisory group like to give any other updates? Who's on the call? I know you weren't expecting to do that, so it's fine if you don't want to. Okay, great. So next up on our agenda here is a quick discussion about spending expiration dates. So I am going to show you how to both update your expiration date on a single requisition and also how you can mass update your expiration dates. But I did want to ask the question if you want ECLA to go ahead and mass update all of the QI dollar expiration dates to April 29th. Right now, I think the default was set as April 16th. And in most cases, what I've been hearing is that people have extended that to April 29th. And what happens at the point of the expiration date is that the provider is no longer able to see the funding in EC Connect. You as a council user are able to still see the dollars in EC Connect. So what it does is it really holds the providers accountable to that deadline. But if there are special circumstances or some reason why you still want to purchase something on behalf of that site after that expiration date, you will have until the end of your grant to make those purchases. So the expiration date does nothing to restrict the council using those funds. The expiration date is really specific to whether or not it's visible in EC Connect by the provider. Are there any questions on that? It looks like someone is saying, yes, please mass update all of PCS funding streams to April 29th, RTT, ESSER, QIP, and CCAP. But then right after that, we have another message that says, please do not update the Larimer County record. So, so we can probably do this a little bit more custom for each council. But I'll show you how to do it yourself. This is pretty funny. I don't know if you guys are watching the chat, but it's sort of, please update, please do not update. So what we'll do is we can send out written instructions on how to update it yourself. And if you don't feel comfortable updating it, then please just submit a support ticket, and we are happy to update that for you. It can be a little nerve-wracking when you mass update a whole bunch of records. You know, you want to make sure you do it correctly, otherwise you might mass update, you know, the wrong field or something, and it's a little bit hard to undo. So if you feel like you want us to do it for you, then we're happy to do that. And then also I thought maybe we could open it up to discussion around if anyone has thought about what their expiration date for Race to the Top QI could or should be. Because it's a rolling application and is being extended into next fiscal year, those expiration dates can actually go across the fiscal year. So for example, you know, we could update all RTTQI requisition deadlines or expiration dates to April 28th of 2017. That just happens to be a Friday, which is why it's the 28th, if we wanted to. But you might want to, as a council, maybe only allow a site, you know, 10 months or some period of time to spend their dollars and not give them so much time. So I was wondering if anyone had any thoughts about what they were planning on doing with their Race to the Top quality improvement dollars and coaching requisitions as it relates to kind of the carryover of QI dollars and coaching into the next year. Has anyone given that some thought yet?
So question, with that rollover, does that money that's rolling over automatically roll over into next fiscal year's budget, or do we have to manage two separate budgets? Because that would determine what our expiration date would be.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So my understanding, and we can see if anyone from OEC is on the call today, but my understanding is that because the Race to the Top grant is an amendment, that it can be considered the same funding stream and would just carry over seamlessly the new fiscal year. So if that is the case, then what we would do is we would not actually create a brand new funding stream record for everyone for their Race to the Top funds. We would actually just go in and modify the end date of your Race to the Top QI funds to next fiscal year. So the rolling application principles and all the requisitions and people who have participated in the program would just carry on exactly as it is this fiscal year. And that's actually going to be really important because unlike school readiness or ITQA or CCAP, there's not this concept of an annual renewal for Race to the Top. It's really, you earn it once when you achieve a level 2, and you could potentially earn it twice if you achieve a level 3 through 5. So it's kind of a way different concept than these other grants. So that's what we are proposing, and I think we'll have clarity on that pretty soon. We're just about a little later in the agenda, we're going to talk about fiscal year 16-17 applications and renewal process, and we can hit on that a little bit more at that time. So we have a couple of questions. Is there an advantage to trying to close out one fiscal year and then begin the next one? I think this question is specific to Race to the Top, and I think that is going to depend on exactly what the guidance is that's given out from the Office of Early Childhood. If it is in fact that Race to the Top funds are simply rolling forward, and by funds, I guess to be specific, I mean the QI dollars and the coaching dollars are just rolling forward to the next fiscal year, then there's not really an advantage to closing out the QI dollars and the coaching hours. That being said, it is my understanding that the council operational budget will probably not be rolling forward. So you need to spend those funds wisely by the end of the year. And then in the new fiscal year, you will have your new Race to the Top budget that we all submitted, plus the QI dollars and coaching resources. It looks like Michelle is on the phone. I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about that, Michelle, or if maybe you could just tell me if I am completely wrong or somewhat on the right path with Race to the Top.
Oh, no, hi guys, this is Michelle from OEC. So Sharon is right, and that's how it's working. So operational funds for Race to the Top, there's going to be a different amount that you had this year versus what you're going to have next fiscal year. But the way the QI and the coaching dollars are is what you were assigned last year. Whatever you have not spent this year, that is what's rolling over and is your budget for next year. So there's really no advantage of closing it out this year because it's just going to keep going as if nothing has stopped through next fiscal year. Hopefully that answers everybody's questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. I appreciate that. And I know there's been some confusion around this coaching allocation of funds. So, if you want to talk more about that, we can maybe set up some time to talk about that. But the idea is, that coaching hours, coaching time was sort of based on this revenue of $100 times the number of direct coaching hours you were planning to perform, but that many of you have reported that your coaching rate is significantly less than $100 per hour. So then you can use those funds for coaching purposes. So If you can provide 2 coaching hours or 3 coaching hours for that same cost, then that's great. You can do that. Or if you want to provide, 1 coaching hour for that cost, plus get your coach trained in all the different important areas that our coaches need to be trained in and working towards their credential, you can also do that. You just have to stick with, I have this many coaching hours directly assigned to providers in this fiscal year, times $100 equals the revenue line of the coaching specific budget. So I hope that didn't just confuse things. But that is what Michelle is referring to as rolling forward, are the QI dollars, and the coaching dollars are rolling forward. Anything that you had for other program operations and expenses, those need to be closed out by June 30th, just like all of our regular grants. See, it looks like we've got another question. Okay, so will there be additional coaching and QI dollars awarded on top of what was awarded previously, on top of what is rolling over? So again, my understanding is that the award amount will not change unless you exceed your uptake rates, your estimated uptake rates. Michelle, I don't know if you want to chime in on that, but basically there were goals set by the state on the number of providers we'd all be serving, and unless you get above that uptake rate, it is unlikely that you would be able to access additional QI dollar or coaching funds.
So the uptake rate is typically 40%. So when you've reached at least 40% of your programs and you are running out of money, then that's when you will contact your coordinator, your regional coordinator at the Office of Early Childhood, and we will work with you to see if we can apply for additional funding to be added to your account for QI dollars. Stacy, does that make sense? Okay, good.
There was a ... after that, thanks. So are you sure that makes sense, Stacy? Okay, great, thanks. So for example, actually, a good example is actually at the Denver Council, we have on average more large centers than homes. And so we saw our uptake rate, we did exceed our uptake rate with centers. Moreover, our centers were larger than the average center in the state. And so our award amount was actually higher than the average per our budget. So in that case, we can document the sites that we're serving are larger, and so this is the reason why we need to request additional funds. But at this time, actually, our uptake rate is low on our home providers, so it's sort of netting out. So we're just going to wait until the end of the fiscal year to request additional funds if we can meet our home provider uptake rate as well. So I hope that provides a good example of those uptake rates and the related budgets. Okay, so Karina's asking, can we get a description of this rollover in writing? Michelle, do you want to handle that question?
So Karina, what exactly are you meaning a description? Like, how is it going to work?
Yeah, with Holly has been out of the office since October, and she deals with most of the budget, and she's working on budgets right now. And I think what we submitted, if I'm thinking correctly, we didn't, so what we had to turn in last week or the week before for next year, we were thinking we were getting an additional pot of coaching dollars and QI dollars to increase the current numbers that we have right now. So I'm not quite sure.
And yet we did not ask for budgets for the QI that you were spending on Race to the Top. And
okay, and I think
that's because those funds are just rolling over. So whatever you had budgeted last year still applies to this year. It's just whatever you have not spent out of that pool of money. So then that's when we were talking about how once you've reached your uptake of 40% and you need and you're running out of that pool of money, that's when you're going to call in and talk to us at the office so that we can then put a case together to then justify you receiving more funding. We do have additional funding that we can give, but we're only giving it to those who have met their their uptake rate.
Perfect. Okay, and that helps. I'm just not quite sure, and I'll have to get with her. With her being out of the office, it's been a little bit of a disconnect with the whole budget versus what's actually happening in the field.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's been a little disconnect as far as the uptake rate and where we sit. Is there a way that the OEC could tell us based on what you have on record versus what we have to see if we're, or what Jessica just asked, could we get an uptake rate percentage out of pulling a report or something?
Well, what we did is the budget that we sent you guys to create your budget for this next year has the number of programs in your area listed right next to your council name on the Race to the Top budget. And you can then look at that, and that should give you then, if you times that by 40%, then that would give you what your uptake rate or how many programs you would need to serve in order to then consider applying for additional funds.
Right,
Okay.
and for example, you could run like an application report by funding stream. That would show you, like this is the one that we send to OEC weekly. This has all councils in it, but if you ran it, then it would just be for your council. And you can make this specific maybe to RTT, QI, for DECC, and you can actually see how many sites you have, and you can export this, and then you can know your uptake rate. So I can take this and look at all of my accepted. I've got some submitted, and I could pop this into a pivot table, and then actually sort it by the application status. I can do a count of the license numbers, and I can see, Denver Early Childhood Council has 228. I think our total number of providers, oh gosh, I'm forgetting, I can't believe it. It's, I think, 412 or something like that. So our total uptake rate is about 53%. So I know that we have exceeded our uptake rate, but I also know that my providers will likely not spend their funds by June 30th. So I can let that roll, get through the end of the year, start the process with OEC on requesting additional funds based on projections for next year, so that we can support additional providers. So that's kind of how you could look at it in one way. This is nice because this report actually includes the QI dollars, the assigned funds, funds utilized, and funds remaining. So you can actually see that all within the same report. So I can know that my total obligation for RTT QI as the Denver Council is $280,000. And I can compare that to my approved budget. So does that sort of help answer that question?
It does. Thank you.
Great. Great. So yes, please, start exploring these reports. There are a lot of really great reports out there, and they really kind of help you feel closer to your information. Let's see. So Jessica's asking, do we get the report of uptake rate from Salesforce? I'm pretty sure that in the council dashboard there is an uptake rate little dashboard in there as well. But I think it's actually really helpful to run the application report from Sugar, because then you can see the QI dollar values and how much you've used of your QI dollars throughout the year. So like if I go back to this report, I can see, I've only, as a council, we've only spent $78,000 of the $280,000. So I'm not worried about, needing to rush and request more funds from OEC right now, because, we're not planning for all of those funds to be expended by June 30th. All right, so Kathy is asking, what if there are programs that are no longer in business but yet still showing as possible sites in Sugar? We have some sites that have been closed for over a year that are still showing on sugar, so that changes our rates. That's a really great question, and I think that's something we're grappling with as it relates to licensing data, you know, on this, in this regard, but in actually many regards. The Trails data system is still what is feeding into Salesforce and Sugar, and in more and more circumstances are showing up where Salesforce and or Sugar would have better data than Trails, but Trails overrides our existing data. So that's something we're really grappling with. I think as a quick workaround, what you would do is you could document to OEC maybe the next monthly invoice you do, and you could just say, you know, please note so-and-so site license number X is closed, so I have removed them from our total uptake rate denominator. So based on my records, I'm showing, you know, 50 sites out of 100 sites instead of 101 sites with an uptake rate of 50%. So you could just be transparent as you're submitting your monthly reports if you know of some specific issues. Now, I don't think that's happening across the board all the time everywhere. I think it's sort of rare use cases, but it is certainly happening. So I think it's good to bring that to OEC's attention just in case they aren't already aware. But they, you know, the data guys over there are really paying close attention to all of this, and they're really trying to strategize on how to make sure that the data is high quality. So I hope that helps answer that question. Any other questions? Okay, so so I don't know that we got to the answer on this particular question around what date we think maybe as a group might make sense as an expiration date for Race to the Top QI. You know, I think this is something we have been talking about internally, and it sort of depends on some different things. So what you might do is say, like, anyone who applied before a certain date, maybe they have one set of expiration dates, and maybe anyone who applies between X date and X date have another expiration date. But I was just curious if other people have been thinking about what the expiration date should be for those sites who have applied in this fiscal year but may spend the funds in next fiscal year. I'm sure somebody has thought about it. Oh, let's see. Does this date not impact wording in the MOUs? That's a good question. So I know that right now there is a group, and I think actually Lisa is involved in it as well, that is reviewing the current year MOUs and proposing revisions for next year's MOUs for all of the grants. And for Race to the Top, because it is an amendment and not a new funding stream year, and so it will kind of roll over the fiscal year, then the plan is to create an amendment to the existing Race to the Top applications so that it can flow across the fiscal year if they haven't spent all their money or coaching hours. So that's not saying that you would necessarily have to do the amendment for each site, but if you know that they're not going to spend all their money or their coaching hours, then you can issue an amendment. That has not been finalized yet. Maybe we'll jump into QI applications. We are trying to get finalization of rubrics, MOUs, the funding allocations, and the application questions themselves. We actually had set a series of dates that we needed those documents completed by, and we kind of have missed those dates. So we are still hoping to release the spring applications by Monday, May 2nd, but it's going to be really tight because we are still, that group is still working on finalizing all of these very important documents that actually affect the way the applications roll out. So, you know, we are working towards that, and again, part of that is finalizing some of these logistical components around the Race to the Top grant as it relates to creating an amendment for Raise to the Top rather than a new MOU for those sites who have funds or coaching hours this year that will roll into the next year. So let's see, we have another question here. What is the deadline to submit proposed additions, revisions for the MOUs for next funding cycle? Who do we send these additions, revisions to? That's a great question. So the state and ECLA actually jointly convened a working group of councils to work on the revision process for applications, rubrics, funding allocations, and MOUs. I know that the new deadline that they are working off of for feedback is April 14th, which is next Thursday. So if you have feedback for those documents, then you can send an email actually to Sarah at eclacolorado.org, and she can help compile those. But at this point, I think OEC and ECLA were interested in kind of having a smaller working group so that we can make sure that all of these documents could be finalized in a timely manner. And they significantly will remain the same. There was sort of an overall objective to make the MOUs simpler and to make the allocation formulas simpler, and to kind of make sure that application questions are specifically answering questions on the rubrics. There was also an overall goal of making sure that the rubrics are set up in a way that maximizes the number of providers being served across all the programs. So trying to distribute funds wider over more providers was a goal that the state set as well. So again, if you're interested in submitting any comments on these documents, then please just email Sarah at eclacolorado.org. So as a follow-up question, can we make specific additions to the MOUs for our council? So that did come up in the working group, and I think that the state is very interested in having a universal set of MOUs, rubrics, and application questions. That being said, if you wanted to create a secondary document that was more specific to your council, there is a way to do that in Sugar that already exists, where you can add in sort of an amendment to that MOU. But I think that the desire is that there's a little bit more standardization when it comes to the legal documents around the MOU, the rubric, that kind of creates the baseline. And then you could give additional guidance sort of on top of that, sort of layer things on top of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Is there anything that anyone wants to talk about, discuss verbally on the call? Like, would that be helpful? Yeah. Is there anything specific on the MOU regarding expulsion data and reporting in monthly to the council? I'm not sure what you mean by expulsion data. Are you available to talk on the phone? Would that be?
This is Angie. I just wanted to know, because we would like to have part of our MOU, have our sites give us information about the number of children that have been if children are no longer enrolled and why, and that type of information. But if it's already going to be in the new MOUs, then we don't need to add it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I don't think that that is in the MOU, actually. Are there other councils who are interested in expulsion data? And how are you collecting that information now? Angie, could you speak to that? Or maybe ECPAC?
We are not. That's why we want to do it in the future.
Oh, good. Okay. So it looks like monthly SurveyMonkey. BECC is, we are not collecting it, but would be very interested because it could drive programs. Wow, that's really cool. You know, actually, that has come up at Denver Council as well, and it didn't occur to me to include that as part of the QI programs, specifically around a requirement for collecting that data. I don't know, Michelle, do you have any, has that been a topic at the state around being interested in expulsion data?
Well, I know that that is something that we are going to really start looking at as we move forward. So I think it's great that you guys are taking the initiative and starting to really look at that data, because yeah, I know that's a hot button that we're going to really start addressing as we're moving forward.
That is great. So, so Sharon Pendergast, I see that you guys have a survey on SurveyMonkey. And since you are also on the Sugar Advisory Group, perhaps what we could do is review that SurveyMonkey at an upcoming Sugar Advisory Group to see what kind of data you're collecting and if there's a way to actually get that information through EC Connect, if you would feel comfortable sharing that. Sure. Okay, great. Okay, so I think that's something, I'm not sure if that will be included in this this round of MOUs. I will certainly bring that up to that group. But in the meantime, I think we can certainly have the Sugar Advisory Group take a look at that and see how we could start tracking that information in Sugar so that it streamlines the process without being too burdensome to providers, of course. All right, so I think the only thing I skipped over here is that, you know, we have been working really hard as a development team on some funding stream and requisition enhancements in preparation for the new applications. We have heard loud and clear the feedback that some councils are worried about over-obligating themselves in terms of accepting more providers into the program than they actually have funds to serve, and what that sort of means. And so we are developing a concept of a self-balancing pooled requisition. So you wouldn't have to update that pooled requisition amount, but that it would be updated based on your approved budget for that budget category. And with that, we are working on implementing some really cool budget control and settings on the funding stream record itself. So it's a little bit complex to just talk through. So what we're going to do is run that concept through the Sugar Advisory Group, which is meeting again next week. And we're going to get that ready to demonstrate on a Friday support call so that we can really collect some good feedback before we actually implement that live in Sugar. But the whole purpose is to really have a holistic view of your entire budget within Sugar. Of course, you are only required to track QI expenses and coaching activities in Sugar as it relates to your budget. You know, you're not tracking your actual personnel expenses or overhead or other kinds of program expenses. But you can track the overall budget categories, which will help give you that complete picture. So we will be working on that, and so I just wanted to give you all the heads up that that's coming soon. And so I guess in the last 5 minutes, we can open it up to additional questions, Q&As. It does sound like Mandy has another question about the rollover process. So do you want to go ahead and, do you want to talk on the phone or just chat those questions in? Okay, well, Mandy, if you want to chat the questions in, oh, here we go. So let's see. We submitted a ticket regarding the classroom field in a coaching detail not saving for multiple coaches. Has this been resolved yet? So we do know that there have been some issues with classrooms, and we have pinpointed the issue to an issue that's actually in Salesforce. So what's happening in Salesforce is that there are certain circumstances in which Salesforce actually archives a set of classrooms and recreates those classrooms. For example, when a site is getting ready to enter the rating cycle, that process happens. And so what that's doing downstream to Sugar is it is creating duplicate classrooms that are identical. And so that has caused some usability issues sometimes. What's funny is that it's not consistent. And so we have identified the issue, and now that CDHS has their developer contract back in place, they were kind of on a maintenance contract and then sort of had some contracting delays. So now one of their top priorities is fixing the issue that's causing duplicate classrooms, and then we will resolve that issue in Sugar. It is going to be a bit of work because we need to preserve all the relationships of those classrooms when we kind of combine those duplicates. So our developers are being very careful as we work on that project. And so we do know that that is an issue. You don't need to worry about which duplicate to pick or anything like that. Just select the room and we will work on kind of restoring those relationships. Now it's possible that those that are missing, you're saying sort of the classroom field is kind of dropping the coaching is dropping the classroom. And it's possible that we actually can still see that relationship in the back end of the system. So it's likely that when we go to restore all those relationships that we'll be able to bring those back. So don't worry about it too much right now. We will be working on resolving that just as soon as the OEC developers are able to kind of resolve that particular issue that we're having downstream. Okay. Yes, and absolutely we will send out an email to the whole Sugar list as soon as we know that that has been resolved. So, and then until then, you know, I know that it does not feel good to see something that you just put into a record kind of disappear, but know that we know that it's an issue, and we do believe we've identified the full problem, and so as soon as certain steps are completed, we'll be able to resolve that. Another thing that came up specifically in the context of the CCAP pilot was a kind of a technical question around the reimbursement of expenses. And this is really from a grant contracting perspective, and I thought it would be helpful to show this on the call. I do believe that some guidance will be sent in the OEC newsletter to councils about this. But there was a question that came up around if you can request reimbursement for an expense as of the invoice date of that expense, meaning when you accrue that expense, versus when you actually pay that expense. And this is a little bit technical, but if your finance person is not on the call, you might just want to bring this up to them, which is if your organization is on an accrual basis of accounting, meaning you recognize an expense when it's incurred, which is equal to the date of service or the invoice date when you order a product, then you can actually bill the state government for those expenses at that time that the expense is incurred. As opposed to if you're on a cash basis, then you recognize the expense at the time you pay the expense, and then you can only request reimbursement once you've actually paid the expense. In most cases, most organizations are on an accrual basis of accounting. And so this is really important because of the cash flow constraints that we're all under, since most of our funding is from cost reimbursement contracts. So what you can do is you can kind of stagger your larger orders towards the end of the month, and then you can book those expenses in your accounting system, invoice for them to the government, receive the payment from the government, and then pay that out to your vendors immediately upon receipt of that payment from the government, so that you're not necessarily having to front those expenses. So there was a particular question that came up from Larimer County, because there has been some guidance given in the past that the state would only accept reports kind of based on the date of payment. But that has been further clarified, because the uniform guidance, the uniform grant guidance, which is codified into the Federal Register, actually does indicate specifically that accrual-based accounting can be used as long as it is the method of accounting of that organization for cost reimbursement contracts. And that link is right here. And so that was clarified, that you know, accrual basis of accounting can be used. And I believe that OEC will be sending out an update that this is allowed. So if you're not exactly sure how this applies to your council, this is a really great opportunity for you to get with ECLA and try to understand how this applies to your council, because it can make a huge difference on your cash flow if you implement an accrual basis of accounting. It's just sort of the more common way to work through accounting practices. So, you know, just wanted to bring that up. You might see something on this in the next OEC newsletter, and that, you know, ECLA is here to support if you have any follow-up questions on how it really applies to you. So that is that. I think we have covered all of the topics. If there are any final questions, I'm happy to stay on the line a little bit longer. Otherwise, I hope you all have a great weekend, and we will see you next week. Thanks so much.
Sharon, are you still there?
Yes.
I have a follow-up question to that, that piece. Just in terms of, one of the reasons I think why our question even came up had to do with the question that had been, or the commenting being thrown around about what dates are being put in sugar regarding our invoices. And our plan, I think we have been putting in the actual date of the invoice. However, obviously prior to this confirmation, we've been billing based on when we paid. We don't intend to go back and change invoice dates, even though it is going to be a little bit of an issue in terms of actually when we paid those invoices and when we build the state on them. For the future, we'll probably go, you know, to the more accrual-based billing of the state. But
right.
I just really, I guess I'm asking, in terms of the invoice date in sugar, how much is this mattering at this point in terms of what's in there?
So that's a great question. So I think Liz Isaacson and I were talking about this with Larimer specifically in mind, and what you want to make sure is that your overall QI dollar purchases in sugar match your overall accounting and invoices to the Denver Council for the CCAP program. And as long as year-to-date we're okay, then we're not going to go back and try and figure out, oh, this should have been in December versus January or things like that. But going forward, I think what you'd want to do as a practice is make sure that the invoice date in sugar at that actual field is exactly the same as the date in your QuickBooks file, because it's just going to make it easier to reconcile. There is a separate field for the payment date, so you can still keep track of dates, but it's just going to be easier to use that invoice date as sort of the authoritative date that ties you back to your accounting system. And then it will be easy when we do spot checks on our side, you know, everything will match. So that's going to be important.
So same thing when a provider submits a receipt for us to reimburse them on, we've actually been using whatever date's been on that receipt. You really want us to do it based on when we receive that then?
Yeah, so that is a great example. So I think, so we have a rule here where if the previous month has closed, then you cannot put in a date in that previous month. So for example, if I get a request from a child care site on, let's say, March 10th, and the date of the receipt is actually February 20th, then, you know, what I would do is I would actually put that, that request in as of the 10th, and that becomes the date of the invoice, because that's the date that I know that I have incurred that expense. And it still needs to be approved and all of that, but I didn't incur the expense in February. The provider incurred the expense in February. So it's kind of a difference from the entity perspective. Now, if you are ordering on behalf of a provider, then you're the one incurring the expense on behalf of the provider. And so then you would just use the regular invoice date.
Right, okay. That's the information I needed and wanted, and I appreciate not having to go back and change.
Oh, good. Yeah, of course. Yeah, we'll just make sure it all reconciles year to date, and then we'll be all set.
And you know, we really are on target for spending all of our funds that were obligated by the 18th of this month. So we will only have our pooled funds to deal with after that. So I think we'll be good.
Yeah, that's so exciting.
We're on track for that. All right. Well, thanks, Sharon.
Oh, of course. Thanks so much. Thanks. All right. So it looks like, Mandy, if you want to talk offline, let me give you my direct line here. And maybe if you want to call at 3:30 and I can wrap things up here.